What we're going to talk about today is what I call Mother Nature and geography. What Mother Nature gives a certain area and the geography of that area has a great impact on the history of that area and the people that came there and settled there and what they did. And what I'll talk about is southeastern Ohio, lime, kilns, clay, iron, coal, and cash crop farming. Now, a lot of the talk will center on areas in southeastern Perry County. I'll tell you why of that as we go along. Ohio history was affected by the glacier that happened tens of thousands of years ago. On this slide here, I show the boundary of the glacier area. South of that, the topography, the mineral resources, and etc. are radically different than north of that line. South of that line is the Appalachian Plateau, Appalachian Mountain area. I picked out Perry County for two reasons. That glacier boundary cuts diagonally across Perry County and divides that county, and the northern half of the county is the unglaciated area. And the southern, southeastern part of Perry County is the Appalachian Plateau. And because of that, it had great influence on what was going on with the history of the area of southeastern Ohio. The history of southeastern Ohio, Perry County, is intertwined with the story of lime kilns, salt, clay, iron, coal, and cash crop farming. In 1815 to 1870 was a time where there was being settled. In southeastern Ohio, especially the central part and the western part of that southeastern stuff, a lot of the settlers came across the Ohio River from Virginia and brought along what they knew and what they'd experienced in Virginia. Tobacco farming was a well-known crop in Virginia. But in that time frame from 1815 to 1870, in the southern part of Perry County and what they call Monday Creek area, there was only bottom land that was probably good for farming because the land is extremely hilly. But the bottom land loaned itself to a crop of tobacco. From 1870 to 1880 is what I call the boomtown era of southeastern Ohio, and especially the southeastern part of Perry County. In that time frame alone, that 10-year time frame, because of the mineral resources, it attracted 10,000 new people to that part of the county, simply because of the mineral resources. In 1880 to about 1920, clay brick plants sprung up, and also oil exploration added to the largest coal production in the state of Ohio, came out of Perry County. Salt was an extremely important commodity that people needed, had to have to survive. This was not only the new settlers that came in, but the wildlife and also the Native Americans knew that where there was salt came out of the ground, seeped out, they could get it. And the first settlers in southeastern Ohio followed those trails and found those salt seeps and developed salt works. Now, the original salt works were very primitive, as you can see in this slide. This is a picture of a salt kennel outside of McCormickville in southern Perry County. That was in the early 1800s. Once they got to that, what they did is they took the salt that seeped out, put it basically in a large kettle, and heated that kettle to boil off the water to make a solid substance of salt. Once the railroads started coming in the 1870s, salt works became a industrial salt production. And like this one drawing that came out of the Perry County Atlas of 1875, shows an area called McCormickville, which sits in the southern part of Perry County. And you can see in the right-hand corner is the industrial building for salt production, which was produced and then into a solid form by using the existing coal reserves that was in the area, and the salt was pumped out of the ground, put in barrels, and shipped out by rail to various locations around the United States. McCormickville now is basically a ghost town with only a few houses left. But at the time in 1875, it was a thriving community. The town was large enough that it even had what we call hotels. This is a picture of what they called a house then, of a house/hotel that existed in that McCormickville. What that hotel did was there was a lot of transients that came through there, making deals for coal, making deals for salt and other commodities. And that's where they stayed when they were traveling through. When the people from Virginia came into that part of southeastern Ohio, especially in the area where the climate was fairly mild in the winter and resembled somewhat the climate of Virginia. In the bottomland, they could grow crops, but it wasn't much point in growing crops that didn't have a marketable value that they could market. And one of those crops was tobacco. Tobacco became quite the crop in southeastern Ohio, especially you get down into Scioto and Lawrence County, but it was in southern Perry County, as you can see from this slide. You got to realize the population was not great. In fact, in 1830, the census said there was only 369 people in the whole township of Monday Creek, 236 in the township of Salt Lick in Perry County. Game was plentiful and farms sprung up along the flatter wetland waterway corridors. In fact, the tobacco became a prime because it had a market value. It could be sold. In Monday Creek Township, a town sprung up by the name of Maxwell, and they developed a warehouse, auction house for tobacco. And the tobacco had been cut and dried by the various farmers. They brought it to the auction house, and buyers would come in from around the country and bid on it. And it was very successful in Perry County, the southern part of Perry County, and also the southeastern part, but the western part, lime. In the southeastern southern part of Perry County, a soft limestone is available. It outcrops there, can be mined by hand. And one of the industries that sprung up in Maxwell area of Monday Creek Township, Perry County, was lime production. It was big. There was dozens and dozens of these lime kilns. They were family, small operations, as you can see here in this drawing. And they'd mine the soft limestone and bring it to these kilns. These kilns were fired by wood because there was a lot of wood forest there. As you can see, it was all done. It was all basically hand stuff. They produced the lime, bagged it, and then took it to market. It's reported that main towns and areas in Ohio, from Lancaster and Zanesville, made plaster out of this lime. And it was highly valued as a very outstanding plaster for homes. Still, and this slide here shows, and the next one will too, is that the bottom part of these lime kilns were stone. This is a picture recently taken within the last year of still some of these stone structures that still exist up in the forest around Maxwell and Monday Creek Township, Perry County. Here is another picture taken, like I said, real recently, of these stone structures of the lime kilns. It's kind of a shame that we don't have some way to preserve those because they have a great history to them. It was an industry developed by the people that came in here in early 1800s and was quite successful. This slide here shows, as I mentioned, the town of Maxwell that sprung up there in Monday Creek Township, Perry County. This is out of the Atlas of 1875 of Perry County. You can see there was quite a little village. Had a post office, a school, church, hotel, physician, general store, saddle shop, blacksmith shop, shoe shops, lime dealer, a person there in town, and you came there and wanted to make a deal to buy lime, he would, arrange how much you wanted to buy and how much it would cost you, and see to it that the lime got delivered and everybody got paid. There also was a racetrack, a horse racetrack. That was because most of those people that settled that part and that time in Monday Creek Township were Virginia, and they had a long tradition of racing horses. On a good Saturday afternoon, evening, you had a good horse race, and you probably did a little betting and probably a little libations also. Most people consider, when they talk about southeastern Ohio, and the first thing that comes to mind is coal. That was not the first thing, but it still was an extremely important thing. Coal underlays just about all of southeastern Ohio. In the north central area of this region, it outcrops in a number of locations and can be dug by hand. Before the railroads were developed in the 1870s, this coal was mined by hand by basically families, very small operations. There wasn't much demand for coal for heating, and there sure wasn't any demand for coal for steam because it hadn't came on the line yet in the early 1800s. But what was available and what minerals was especially in this part of the southeastern Ohio was a coal called Canal Coal, which is a very waxy material, very shiny and very waxy, and it burns extremely hot, and was very much in demand by blacksmiths. And this was mined by hand and sold and shipped off to various blacksmiths around Ohio and even other areas. Once the railroads began to arrive in the 1870s, the mining of coal became an industrial business in southern Ohio coal fields. To give you a feel for the early coal mining, basically a lot of it was, like I said, Canal Coal. Here is a picture and a drawing of a typical operation. As you can see, you dug it by hand like that, took it out by even wheelbar, or you had a cart. You dug it out of the hillside because it outcropped in a lot of areas in the north central part of southeastern Ohio. And you hauled it to whatever markets there were for Canal Coal, and some was used for heating in the cities, such as Lancaster and Zanesville, that the trees had all been cut down some time ago. But it was carried in the early 1800s, before the railroad system really developed, by horse and wagon, and all dug by shovels, as you can see. This is another drawing that shows a coal mining operation before the railroads came. As you can see, it's a family operation. The little kids were involved. You just mined a little bit of coal and you sold it as a commodity to make some money. And then starting in the 1870s, after the Civil War and stuff settled down, the railroads in a big way came into southeastern Ohio, and especially in the southern part of Perry County. Here is a picture of an operation at that time frame in Renville, Ohio. And you can see, and it's an industrial operation. It's not a shovel and a wheelbar and a family and the kids doing the mining. In the early part of the industrial coal mining era, a lot of the underground transportation was done by rail. They were pulled by mules. The electric cars and all that hadn't come on the scene at all. You had people pushing those cars, pulling those cars underground, pick and shovel loaded the car, and the mule pulled it out. Mules were the preferred rather than horses, because one thing, they were shorter, and also they were stronger than horses. Once the railroad arrived and they started setting up large coal operations, industrial operations, you had towns that were set up, and they were everywhere. You just about go up any valley and you could find a mining town. The companies established the neighborhoods. They built the shops. They even paid their workers in companies' own currency called scrip. And the miners would take the scrip down to the company store and get whatever they needed for the family. But scrip could not be used for the train tickets. I don't know why. Maybe they didn't want them to leave. Scrip was a common way. This is a picture of Buckingham Company store in Perry County. Iron. You won't find a dozen people nowadays that even think about iron being an industrial item that was produced in southeastern Ohio, but it was. Iron production started in the 1820s, basically in the area called Hanging Rock area of Lawrence County. They were small operations, but they produced an iron that was in much demand. And in that area, in Lawrence County and Athens County and Hocking County and Jackson County, there was these iron furnaces. The iron ore was dug in the hillsides, on top of hills, all by hand, carted in. These kilns were fired by charcoal that was made out of the lumber trees were cut down in the hillsides. There was in a neighborhood of about 45 of these that they can count in southeastern Ohio, and they did the counting in 1869. Most historians will say nowadays that in 1860, when Abraham Lincoln ran for president, he basically won the so-called swing state of Ohio because he promoted a tariff on iron coming from England into the ports of New York and so forth. England shipped their iron over at a discount to undercut the prices, and Lincoln proposed that they put a big tariff on that to stop it. That went over real well with the iron people in southeastern Ohio. You got to remember, the people in southeastern Ohio weren't exactly great northern lovers sometimes. They had a leaning towards the south because a lot of them came from there. But because of the iron tariff that he proposed, he won. We got to give some legacy to the iron of southeastern Ohio of electing Abraham Lincoln the first time. The original iron furnaces were wood-fired. They took the wood and made charcoal out of it and used the charcoal as a fuel for the iron furnace. 1885, that all changed. And it all changed because of a guy by the name of Frank Blair. Blair had some interest in a charcoal furnace in Logan area. He had the foresight to see that the coal deposits that existed in southern Perry County had the chemistry that would fire an iron furnace. He built one in Monday Creek Township up in the country, and fired it up in 1875. It was a huge success monetarily. Set off a stampede of coal-fired iron furnaces in that part of Ohio. You got to remember, those iron furnaces, they mined the ore in the area, they mined the coal in the area, and they also mined the limestone for the flux in the area. So everything that was done there. Where Blair Furnace in Monday Creek became a large industrial operation. A town sprung up there of about 250 people. They had schools, buildings, and homes, stores. Nowadays, you can't find one thing out there. It's all forest. In fact, the land is now owned by the U.S. government, Wayne National Forest. Here is a picture of the charcoal furnace, the early ones that came in starting in 1820. Here's a picture of Hope Furnace remains on the left. It's the Alaska State Forest. And the state has rehabbed one, the Buckeye Furnace in Jackson County, as you can see on your right. These were rather small operations compared to what we'll see here in the industrial ones that came up in the 1870s. But they employed a lot of people between the cutting of the wood, the charcoal making, digging of the ore, the flux, and the operation of the iron furnace. Anyone like the size of these furnaces you see in this picture, it's estimated that they basically employed about 200 people. Here is a picture of the Blair Furnace, basically at the end of its operation when it was being basically dismantled. It's the only picture I could find so far of the original Blair Furnace that set off the stampede of the industrial iron furnace in southeastern Ohio using coal. Like I said, it was a very successful operation financially. It ran until 1888. Here is a picture of the iron furnace in Moxie, Ohio. Now, you drive on 13 through Moxie, you would never dream industrial iron production there, but there was, and employed a lot of people. They had just for a sideline, they built a big reservoir. industrial iron things had to have a reservoir for various reasons, to run their steam operations and etc. for water. When I was a kid growing up, the Moxie Reservoir, it does no longer exist because they breached the dam, but it was a favorite place for kids to go and hang out and swim. This is a picture of the Bessie Furnace in New Statesville, Ohio. You can see it was an industrial operation. Bessie Furnace was the last furnace to operate in that part of Ohio. It operated up until 1921. Its last owner was Cacklemacher, which became a quite famous financier on Wall Street. It was a very successful operation from its startup in the 1870s until it closed down in 1921. Now, most of the iron closed down because of the competition from Michigan. The iron ore in Minnesota was a very good iron ore, and it could be mined much cheaper and shipped onto Lake Michigan and then on down to furnaces along all those areas. Here I've listed the iron furnaces that were built in 1870 to 1880. There's 13 of those. 4 of those iron furnaces were located in Shawnee, Ohio, and they all were blasting at the same time. And you can imagine the smoke and commotion of having 4 industrial iron furnaces running in one place there in Shawnee. And the iron furnaces, along with the coal and then the brick plants, made Shawnee a real boom town starting in the 1870s up until the turn of the century in the 1900s. Shawnee grew to a town of almost 5,000 people in that time. Now it's about 500. This is a list of the rest of them, and as I mentioned, Bessie Furnace was actually decommissioned in 1920. The last blast furnace to operate in the area. Cacklemacher rebuilt it there in 1905. It had a silicon iron that it perfected, which was very well received in the market as hard and durable. This is the town of Dixon. Sits in Perry County, south of New Lexington, up in a hollow. There's nothing there now except trees. But at that time, in 1875, this comes from the Atlas of 1875 of Perry County, a drawing. You can see the iron furnace up on the left-hand side. It was quite the little village, according to the history of that area. And it had a number of people, like 100 and some people, well-kept homes. They mined the iron ore just north of that, coal right in that area. There was a railroad line that went through there. It was quite successful. Clay was another mineral that Mother Nature put down in southeastern Ohio, and especially in the area of southern Perry County. What sprang up in the 1880s, a lot of brick plants, large brick plants. The pottery industry sprung up to be big. The brick plants and tile plants where they made tile for roofing. In fact, a tile plant in New Lexington called Ludowishi's in Washington, D.C., of the Supreme Court building and the tile roof, it came from Ludowishi's in New Lexington. The one picture on your right is a claycraft factory in Shawnee where produced a high-quality brick that had a glaze on it in various colors of reds and yellows and so forth on the face of it, and ran until sometime in the 1990s, but it ran for years and years. You had clay mines all different places. The one on the left is a Moxie was a clay mine, and there was a pottery plant in there. This is a picture of a brick plant. It's set right outside of Corning, Ohio. Ran for a lot of years. And you can see the kilns there in the picture, and also clay was mined in the local area. The bricks were all manufactured and made there and shipped out all over the place in the United States. This was duplicated in a lot of places in southeastern Ohio, and especially southern Perry County. This is a picture of what was the Iron Clay Brick Company in southern Perry County, and it was a very, very large operation. It made a lot of products of different decor bricks, regular run-of-the-mill bricks, a lot of fancy pieces. It was a very large operation. Everything just about was mined and came just from the local areas, employed hundreds of people.